All right. It's 3:15, folks. Thank you all for being here on a very sunny Thursday afternoon. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come join us. I'm Bruce Compass. I'm a professor here in psychology and in pediatrics. And it's my pleasure to try to give you some good vibes as you leave Vanderbilt students and parents. So I want to tell you about some work we do here. First thing I want to do, though, is congratulate you. So students, congratulations. Some of my own students are here. It's great to see them. They've never taken a class from me. I don't teach undergraduate classes, so this is my first chance to lecture and see if they start texting and doing the things that I've heard that they do. It's been great working with you all. It's hard every year to say goodbye. It really is. Great students who've been with me for 2 or 3 years, so welcome. And parents, congratulations, parents. Students, clap for your parents. My wife and I have 2 children, both of whom have graduated from college. Moms and dads, here's the deal. Neither one of them live with us. They both have jobs, and life is good. So, because this is a lecture on stress, and that could have been one of the stressors. I was talking with a few people outside that if you need help coping with, wait a minute, they're back, we can work that into the talk. But moms and dads, I get it. This has been a big deal for you for the last 4 years, and congratulations on all that happened. I want to share some things about my job and the work that I do. And I always think other than being able to play power forward for the LA Lakers, I never would have picked a better job than this. And they never called. They never asked. And if you're looking at me, I think it's pretty obvious why they didn't. So I think a great job is one where you love what you do, and you think there's a chance that what you do might make a difference. So I want to talk about that. I'm not sure that what we do in our work has made a difference yet, but I come to work every day with the goal that that's what we're going to try to do. So what we try to do is understand things that threaten our mental health and our physical health. And the biggest threat I can tell you about is stress. So that's what the talk is going to be about today. Talks about stress can be a real downer. I've been to some lectures on stress, and all it tells you is how bad stress is for you. And I'm going to do that. My job first is to scare you just a little bit, just a little bit. You know stress isn't good, but I'm going to convince you it's even worse than you thought. But the better message is we can do something about it. So what I've learned in the time I've been doing it, and it's more than 30 years, is a very simple truth to start. Life is not a level playing field. It's just not. It's not even. And what happens is that some children and families are faced with much higher levels of stress and greater levels of adversity than others. Okay? I'm looking at you all and I'm thinking, maybe you dodged that. Maybe some of you overcame it. But that's not the real meat of the story. The real meat of the story is, in spite of being faced with significant stress and significant adversity, some people are remarkably resilient. Not only do they get through it, but some people seem to thrive in spite of all those problems that come their way. And we learn a lot from them. They teach us how to deal with stress, how to navigate the problems of life. And in our research, that's what we do. We listen carefully to these people because they are truly resilient. The problem is some folks are vulnerable to that adversity and to that stress. And our job is to figure out what designates them. And then we spend our time trying to help people who are vulnerable become resilient. And that's the part that's fascinating to me. It's interesting to me every day. It's a puzzle. But if we could do that, that'd be a payoff, wouldn't it? If we could help people who seem to be defeated by stress and adversity and difficulties in their life to overcome those things. If we could do that as behavioral scientists and psychologists, that's a real contribution. I could go home at the end of the day, at the end of a career, and feel okay about that. So I'll sort of give you a progress report on how we're doing. I don't think we've done it yet, but that's what we're committed to. So, a few parts to this. I'm a pretty good observer, so if the eyelids start to go, if the texts come out, I'll know I need to skip through some slides. I need to come up with better jokes. We'll figure out what that will be. But I need to tell you about stress, why it's bad for us. And again, you know that, but I'm going to maybe scare you a little bit. It's a little worse than you think. Then I want to talk about what are sources to help us to be resilient. And I have to talk to you about the brain. There's just no getting around it. So you brought your brains. Good. I'm going to talk to you about your brains. I'm going to show you what your brain looks like on stress. You're not going to like that. and then I'll show you how we can turn that around. Communication and support is crucial in how we help people to be resilient, and the absence of those things is a big source of vulnerability. Makes a big difference in who seems to get beaten down by stress. And then the real part of the story is, how do we learn to cope with stress? You know people in your lives. They seem to be good at coping with life's difficulties. They manage them well, and other people don't. And that's the task here. Can we understand that? All that leads to building resilience. The research we do, tough topics. Part of our research is purely in the arena of mental health. So we study depression and how depression runs in families. If I'm a child whose parent suffers from depression, I'll tell you this again a little later, but if my parent suffers from major depressive disorder, I have about a 4 to 5-fold increased risk of becoming depressed myself. And our job is to stop that. We don't want that passing on to continue in families. And I'm going to give you some very positive data. We've done that. We've protected kids from that. And then the other half of our research is in the realm of pediatrics. We study children with chronic illnesses. We study children with cancer. We study children with sickle cell disease, congenital heart defects, and a bunch of other conditions. And all of that is stressful for children who suffer from those problems, but also their parents as well. So let's start with stress. Don't let anybody convince you that stress is all in your mind. And don't let anybody convince you that stress is all out there in things that happen to you. To understand what is stressful, we need to know two things. What's happened in your life, and how did you think about it? And it's that combination of the two that tells us the level of stress you're experiencing. So if I were to try to diagnose or assess how much stress is in your life, I need to know what kinds of things have been happening to you recently, but I also need to know how you think about those things. It's that unique combination. And stress comes in a bunch of different shapes and sizes. Some stressors are traumatic, some are big life events, some are small events, and some things are chronic adversities that just keep happening. So, easy example of the first one. First research I did with cancer patients started 30 years ago. Oh, God. And I was 12 at the time, I'll have you know. So think Doogie Howser, and then we're in good shape. No, I wasn't 12. Working with cancer patients, and at the time, I lived in Vermont. I was a professor at the University of Vermont, and I thought the 3 worst words you could hear is, "You have cancer." And then 13 years ago, I moved to Vanderbilt, and I switched. And rather than studying moms and dads and adults who have cancer, we focused on children with cancer. And then I figured it out. It's not those 3 words. It's these 4 words. Your child has cancer. And what a devastating piece of news that is, and how hard that is. And it is traumatic. It's sudden, unexpected. We work with children with brain tumors. They show up in the emergency room with symptoms like headaches and nausea, and their parents think they have the flu. And a workup gets done and a scan's done, and they're told in the span of 20 minutes it went from the flu if your child has a mass on their brain, and we need to do surgery, and we need to do radiation and chemotherapy. It's traumatic, it's sudden, that's a big event. One level down would be a major life event, not traumatic, but a big deal, parental divorce. Parents separate and split. It's disruptive, it's stressful, it's challenging. It doesn't seem to hit that level of trauma, although for some it can. Minor events. My favorite minor event is traffic. I am unable to cope with traffic. In fact, what we had to do recently, just last summer, is after commuting Nashville, I love Nashville, but traffic in Nashville is abysmal. There's just, you cannot move your car around. So we moved from about a 35-minute commute to about an 8 to 10-minute commute. And boy, that's a lot better, because I don't have to cope with traffic. I love to drive, I love my car, I love my Infiniti. I love to spend time, but not standing still, not sitting, not going anywhere. So traffic's a great example. For kids, it's schoolwork. For some of the families we study, it's arguments, sort of low-level conflict that sits in the background in families. It happens a lot. Each time is not a big deal, but it happens 2-3 times a week, and it starts to build. And then the bottom one is chronic adversity. Biggest one that I can imagine that takes a toll on people is poverty. So growing up in the face of significant economic disadvantage and the grind that that puts on children and families and how tough that is. But a chronic illness, a chronic mental health problem, those things also can constitute, there's no event there. We can't find the thing that happened, but we find our conditions that exist, and those conditions in and of themselves are challenging. Okay? So 4 different levels, 4 shapes and sizes, what happens and how you think about it. But here's the deal. Really, the story is about the recurrent stuff. So this picture would show a pebble dropping into some water. And where the pebble hits and you see the water shoot up, that's an event, a big event, where it plunks. But the real story of those pebbles when they hit the water, when the rock hits, are the ripples that come out from it. Every single event that we have studied in our research produces ripples, and every single part of the effect is due more to the ripples than to the event itself. So it's the kinds of chronic things that emanate from even a traumatic event. Your child has cancer, okay? Now, he or she's going to go through a surgery perhaps, 3 years of chemotherapy, 6 months of radiation therapy. They're going to lose their hair. They're going to miss school. They're going to be made fun of by some of their friends. They may lose their ability to think as well as they do right now. I don't know if anybody caught the series on PBS, The Emperor of All Maladies. Did anybody happen to see this? One. I cannot recommend this enough. So Ken Burns, I roll my eyes because whenever I talk with students about Ken Burns, they go, who the hell is Ken Burns? And what do you mean a series about the Civil War? What was the Civil War? Sorry, students. But Ken Burns, who is truly the brilliant documentary maker of any generation, did a series on cancer and used the book, The Emperor of All Maladies. And in the first episode, they focus on a couple of children with cancer. And in one segment, the oncologist looks into the camera and says, my job right now is to tell these parents that in order to save the life of their child has to lose about 10 to 15 IQ points. They're not going to be the same because the treatment is so aggressive and the effect that it has on the developing brain, it's going to be a massive hit. Now, there's no choice. But that ripple that came from the diagnosis saved my child's life, no question. Long-term effects that ripple out, huge. So the action is in things that keep happening. As it turns out, psychologically and biologically, we're in really good shape to deal with the events. Biologically and psychologically, we're in terrible shape to deal with the chronic ones. Okay. Well, we're going to do some biology, and I apologize. That's where I'm going to be watching the eyes and seeing if you're with me or not. We're going to talk about hormones running through your body and all kinds of stuff like that, brain cells, but we'll do it. Okay. Effects of stress. It affects your physical health, but here's a rule. Stress does not make you sick. What stress does, it makes it more likely that other things will make you sick. And I'm guessing you can see a pathway. What stress does is compromises your body's immune system, your ability to fight off those other things that might make you sick. So it's not directly something that causes physical illness, but it exacerbates it and it makes you vulnerable to it. Stress does lead to mental health problems. In fact, if I only had one thing on which I can put all my research money, as to what leads to things like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, etc. It would be stress. Not genes, not the neurobiology of the brain. It is stress. Okay? So very potent, big deal. But again, what's fascinating about it, what makes it interesting, it would be simple if everybody who experienced a stressor had the same outcomes, but they don't. Same stressful event for everybody in this room, huge differences in how we'll be affected. Some of us will be resilient. Some of us will develop physical difficulties. Some of us will develop mental health problems. And again, the fascinating piece, the intellectual challenge, brings me back every day is can we figure that out? Can we make a prediction? Who's going to make it? Who's not? If they're affected, how will they be affected? And by the way, one of the person who was in here before me talking about medieval executioners, and I feel like I was a good follow-up to that, talk about stress. Did all the questions at the end. I am absolutely happy to take questions you have as we go along. So if there's things you want to pick up on as we're going, no problem with it. I can always get right back on track. So the things I'll focus on in terms of what can make us more vulnerable, but can also protect us for stress, is your brain and something called your executive functions. And some of you may know about this already a lot. Others, it'll be kind of news, but I'll be pointing to the front of my head a lot, so you should be staying in the front of your head a lot today. It's where your executive functions live, and we'll talk about those. We'll talk about a little bit about communication and support. I decided to focus more on the third, how we cope with stress, but communication and support, particularly the way parents interact with their children, has a big effect on their emotional development, but hey, here's some news, a huge effect on their cognitive development. So students, if your parents are sitting next to you, I'd like you to just give them a quick nod saying, thank you, because I'm here because of you. So every minute that you spent, thank you, yes, go moms and dads. And yeah, I'm a dad, I know, but every minute that you spent reading to your children, every minute that you spend interacting and both supporting and challenging and supporting and challenging, that's what facilitates brain development and cognitive development in children. Parents shape and influence the development of the brain and the ability to think, particularly in this prefrontal region. So go moms and dads, nice job. If you have a kid at Vanderbilt, by the way, I had a son who graduated from Vanderbilt, as I mentioned. Pam gets all the credit, not me. Okay, so in the ways we respond to stress, the first thing is something you've heard about for a long time, and that is the fight or flight response. So there are those zebras, and in the corner of the picture is a gentleman named Robert Sapolsky, who is a MacArthur Genius Fellow. He's a biologist at Stanford. His book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is sitting up there in the corner. When I look at Bob, I just think, I don't look like a scientist. Robert Sapolsky looks like a scientist. And so, students, you're out now, but I'm thinking I'm going to go that way. I'm going to let the beard go and let the hair kind of get, it's not curly, but at least it get bigger and people will show me more respect. He's brilliant, and this book is brilliant. What it shows, it starts with this fight or flight response, which is in us through all kinds of evolutionary processes, is wired into us. That when we're faced with threats and challenges and difficulties in our lives, our instinct, our biological instinct, is either to approach and fight off that stressor or to escape from it. And I said, we're well built to handle acute events. So when something sudden happens, we're wired to make what kind of responses that these zebras are doing. And one of the big parts of how we do that, okay, here we go. Now is where I'm going to watch eyes, because now we're going to talk about a little biology and a little bit about the brain. We respond by producing a hormone called cortisol. So it starts, so you can see this guy's stressed. His fists are clenched, his mouth is kind of open, his eyebrows are up, he's looking ready, he's going to make a fight response, he's ready to go. Up on the top, in a region of his brain called the hypothalamus, it gets activated. And it has a very short distance to trigger a response in the pituitary gland, which sits right at the base of your brain. And then there's a long process. The pituitary gland produces another hormone that has to cascade all the way down to the top of your kidneys, which is where your adrenal glands are. Okay? And I often do that in meetings with students. I'll say, okay, everybody, you're all smart, point to your adrenals. And they're pointing up here and at their feet. And eventually we kind of get to the kidneys at some point in time. It's a silly place to put them. It's very inefficient to have to go from your brain all the way down there. But as you get faced with stress, a slow-acting response is eventually you will produce cortisol in those. It'll circulate through the blood. And cortisol actually functions as a glucocorticoid, meaning the reason it's there is to break down glucose to give you energy to make a physical response to stress. Smart. So if a fight or flight response is what you need, this is a good thing to have happen. So it's biologically adaptive that we produce cortisol. In addition, there are receptors for cortisol in your brain. One place there's a receptor for it is in the hypothalamus, and as soon as it hits the hypothalamus, your body puts the brakes on. It says, okay, got the signal, got enough, don't need any more, put the brakes on. I'll explain to you how that may have gone wrong in my brain and in your brains in a moment. So, in addition, cortisol changes over the course of a day. Is there any parent here who said these words at some point? Please eat your breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day. Yeah, okay, yeah. Students, they were right, okay? And right up there is the reason. Your body has a natural diurnal pattern to spike production of cortisol to break down glucose when you wake up in the morning. That's when it's at its peak. It goes down, 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 of course, over the course of the day. It troughs in the evening. When you go to bed, it starts back up again. It begins to slowly build up so that when you wake, your body has cortisol so that when you eat that good breakfast that they told you to eat that you don't, and I know, we've had 8 o'clock meetings. Heaven help us. You should see what they bring to these meetings. It's terrible. But they have glucose to break down whatever it is that they're eating that they think is good. So it's an adaptive response. It's a good thing. And I'll show you a figure here. The most adaptive response is at the top. Biologically and psychologically, what we want to do when we face a stressor, that little red line at the top, is generate a response and then slowly recover. That's adaptive. That's what our cortisol does when we face a stressor. It spikes in response to the threat, the brakes go on, it cascades down, and we recover. The problem lies in the bottom 4. So there's multiple ways in which this biological system, put cortisol in there, emotional system, I was afraid, I was sad, I was angry, it shoots up and then it recovers. Emotions and biology all should show the top pattern. Many times they don't. The worst one potentially is the one in the lower left, and that's a failure to recover, a sustained response. So I pump out high levels of a hormone that I need acutely in one moment, and I sustain those over long periods of time, damage may be done. Or if I sustain a negative emotion, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared for prolonged periods of time, what that does to me emotionally and psychologically. So our job is to understand people who show that top response and a multitude of maladaptive ones on the bottom. Can we change those and shift those things around? Okay, so yes.
I just had a quick question that may be a little off, but
That's okay.
does that have any relation, since you brought up the physical, to diabetes? Like
Yes.
stress and cortisol levels and
Yep,
breaking down sugar?
absolutely.
Are you more prone to physical illnesses like diabetes or anything?
If you have juvenile onset type 1 diabetes, one thing we know is you need to very carefully regulate the levels of glucose in your system because your body's not producing insulin to be able to manage that. Stress alters that system. So if I'm a child, a 14-year-old with type 1 diabetes, I actually have to manage and monitor my levels of stress because that's going to affect these glucocorticoids, which will affect my body's response to glucose in the system. And so I can either have hyper or hypoglycemia in response to not only what I eat, but also my emotions. Yeah. Okay. And is it related to onset of some physical diseases? It makes you vulnerable to some of those. So remember, stress makes you vulnerable, and so this is one of the pathways through which this will happen. Okay, a little bit more now about the brain, because here comes the worst news about stress. It's in the next couple of slides. Sorry, if you need to go now, go. You just don't want to know. And we would call that avoidant coping, and it doesn't work, so you might want to stay. 4 parts of your brain that are important. Your amygdala, there are 2 of them. Amygdala is actually the Greek word for almond, so there's this little almond-shaped thing, 2 of them, deep down in your brain. And they're basically like sentries in your brain. They monitor for things that are scary and threatening and might harm you. And they get activated when there's scary stuff out there that you see. They talk to other parts of the brain, including the hypothalamus, to trigger the cascade of cortisol. A good part of your brain is the hippocampus. It's U-shaped, sits big in the middle, and that's where you store stuff for the long haul. In addition, there's your prefrontal cortex. So Homer Simpson on the top, very tiny prefrontal cortex, very tiny brain. You much, much bigger. And it's that part of the brain, I'll show you in a second, that's responsible for doing all the executive stuff. All the complex thinking, all the management of your emotions, dealing with stress lives there. When you're stressed, the emotional parts, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, rev up, and the other parts seem to calm down. So there's interplay. Executive regions here, responsible for managing things, including how I'm going to cope with stress. Emotion regions have to activate when something bad is happening to me. Emotions are adaptive. So the rule about emotions, they're not things we want to get rid of. Emotions are important because they tell us something in our life is happening that matters. They're a huge signal. If you have a feeling, it's because it matters. Now, apparently, nothing matters to guys because we have no feelings, but they happen, right? Sports and a few things like that. I was quite upset. I got a text last night. I spent many years living in New England, and if you live in New England, you get attached to New England teams. And somebody, one of my current graduate students, just sent me a thing with a link, no words, nothing, just a link to a New York Times story about this Deflategate thing. Big emotional reaction for me. And I was careful, I didn't respond immediately, but I wrote back and I said, that article was printed in a paper in New York about a team that's near Boston. It's all lies. Don't believe it. Okay? He didn't do it, and he didn't know. Okay? That's it. So I kicked the executive function part in. So here's what should happen in your brain during good times. What should happen in your brain is we learn things, we store information. And when we do, there's an actual biological change that happens in your body, in your brain. For a short-term memory, you see a neuron. There's a connection between one cell and the next. That's crucial in your brain. Move information across cells, across those synapses. A short-term memory, there's a greater potentiation. The cells are activated. A long-term memory, you actually grow new synapses in your brain. That's the biological basis of a memory. The gentleman over there is Eric Kendall. He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology because he figured that out. He figured it out by studying sea slugs. They were perfect because they have one giant neuron that runs down their back, and when he conditioned them to do things, lo and behold, if they got conditioned to make a response, they grew new connections. Okay? This is good. If you want to prove that you're a geek, here's what you do. So we vacation every couple of years with college friends, and now with college friends and their kids. We often go to Nantucket Island, and a few years ago, I chose as my summer book Eric Kendall's book on searching for memory. Oh my God, was I boring that summer. You know, I just was reading all these things about the biological basis of memory. I couldn't wait to share them. Nobody would sit with me at dinner. Nobody wanted to be next to me on the beach. But I'm telling you, this is a great book. It's the story of his life, how he was grew up in Europe and escaped the Nazi invasion in Austria, came to the United States, and how he ended up being one of the greatest neuroscientists of all time and discovered what it is that happens in the brain when you create a memory. So you create connections, okay? Good news. Remember that, because here's what happens when you're stressed. And about 5 or 6 of you know this. It breaks those connections. So we want connections between those dendrites, those endpoints of the nerves. And what stress does is causes the endpoints of the nerves to retract. The cells don't die, but they stop talking to each other. So while growing new connections is a good thing, stress severs those connections. So on top, you see those X's, which would be those dendrites under chronic stress, begin to get damaged and withdraw. It's not coming through very clearly, but it's even worse than that. In the executive part of your brain, the part you need to use to manage stress and do complex thinking, those dendrites withdraw and disconnect. But in the emotion part of your brain, they get bigger and they grow more connections. So the emotion part of your brain that's going to rev up emotions and out of control make these big responses gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the part you need to control your behavior and manage those stressors, solve problems, think in complex ways, gets hurt and gets damaged. If you've ever had a sense that when you're feeling stressed, you have trouble concentrating, you have trouble remembering things, you don't seem to feel as efficient about things, here it is. So Bruce McEwen, there are big Bruces in the world and little Bruces. And I'm one of the little Bruces. The 3 big Bruces, Bruce McEwen, a genius in terms of stress research, Bruce Willis, and Bruce Springsteen. That's it. Okay? I didn't make it, but I look up to those Bruces. They're big. And McEwen, a little less known than Willis or Springsteen, is right there. And he's shown this again and again. Scariest one, and a couple of you are going on to medical school, scariest one is he did a great study with medical students as they prepared for their boards, and this is what happened. As they got stressed preparing for the boards, their cognitive function eroded, and he showed a decrease in connectivity in important parts of their brains. So my tip on that one is when you go see the physician, make sure that they haven't been up for 3 days, on call for 3 days, because they're not going to be functioning as well as they should. Okay? Okay. So stress affects the brain. I mentioned at the beginning that chronic adversity, like socioeconomic disadvantage, is a big deal. It gets to things like cognition, cognitive development, et cetera, et cetera. It gets there through effects on the brain, and it gets there to a great degree through effects on parenting. So I asked y'all to congratulate your parents for all the great things they did for you. What a terrific researcher named Gary Evans has shown in his research is that chronic adversity due to poverty affects kids' cognitive development, and one of the reasons is it makes it hard for parents to be the kind of parents they want to be. When you're working 2 jobs and you have 4 kids and you're struggling to make ends meet, you don't have time to do that kind of careful, responsive parenting that you all were able to do. And so part of our job in working with some of our families is how do we build in supports so that parents can play the role that sits in this green box right here to provide support to their kids and facilitate brain development. Okay. In addition, so the story kind of goes on and gets a little worse and a little worse. It's going to get better in a moment. The children we study with chronic illnesses, so we study children with leukemia, children with brain tumors, children with sickle cell disease, children with congenital heart defects. All of those children, through either the disease they suffer from or the treatments they receive, take big hits in brain development. If I'm a child with a brain tumor, it seems like kind of duh, they're going to have problems with cognitive function, but it's complicated. They have problems due to the tumor itself. They have problems due to the resection to remove the tumor that saves their life. They have huge problems if you dose a brain with radiation therapy and chemotherapy. It kills cells. It kills the bad ones, and it takes a lot of the good ones along with it. If I'm a child with leukemia and I have chemotherapy injected into my blood, it goes to my brain and affects brain cells. If I'm a child with sickle cell disease, I'm basically starving my brain of oxygenated hemoglobin because of malformation in the cells. The hard thing for us and what we're trying to solve is that those kids with those illnesses, it's a bitch to have one of those sicknesses. It's stressful, it's challenging constantly. And yet, the part of the brain they need to learn how to deal with the stress of their illness has been compromised either by their disease or by the treatment itself. So it's a huge double hit. So we need to do something to fix things for those kids because my colleagues in pediatrics, they do miracles. They save lives. And our job is to come in and pick up the pieces. And it's a great, great teamwork. I'll put in a pitch how wonderful it is to be at Vanderbilt and how easy it is for somebody like myself in psychology to work with my colleagues in medicine and in pediatrics. The door is open. They welcome us for what we can bring to the table to help solve some of the problems for these kids. Jay Wellens, my colleague in neurosurgery, I truly have such respect. I'm in awe of what Jay does to save lives, but he says the most important thing we need to do now is put them back together again, and that's what we'll talk about now. One other note, there's a little bit of data on how we use functional imaging data to show on the top is a line showing activation in the brain for children who survived a brain tumor. On the bottom, the red line is for healthy kids. And steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, we give them something complicated to solve, a mental problem, while they're in the imaging scanner. The kids who survived a brain tumor do badly on those problems. And yet, they work harder in their brain than the healthy kids do. So a higher point on this line here, if we look at that vertical axis where the blue ones are, that means more blood being recruited to the brain to work harder and work harder. And these kids who survived a brain tumor work and work and work and work, and they can't do it. The healthy kids don't really start working hard until the hardest level of the problem that says 3 back. So we see the compromise. We see the effort. They're trying. Their brains just aren't working efficiently. So our job then is to see, can we improve brain function in some way? Yeah.
What, if anything, is the explanation for the decrease in, I guess, effort or blood usage for the harder problems for those who survive brain tumor?
Yeah, it looks like a slight decline, and we think to the degree that that would be a significant decline, at that point they're kind of given up. The problem has just gotten so hard. They've been trying as the problems got harder and harder. They're not solving it, and we think they kind of disengage. The other ones, they see the problems are getting harder, they work harder. It's like the blue line, the survivors. They've already hit the ceiling. They can't do anymore. They can't recruit any more effort. So that's the beauty of things like brain imaging methods. You can really see the efforts, like recruiting blood to a muscle when I'm trying to exercise, and it's happening the same way in the brain. Okay, I'll tell you 3 things that are much more on the positive side. I'm mindful of the clock. I'm watching the eyes. I'm seeing who's texting. First is there some way we can actually improve brain function? Controversial. Can we teach a single coping skill? I'm going to tell you about mindfulness. This comes from perhaps one of the least mindful people on the planet. I keep trying, but I'll tell you about mindfulness. And the third is really what you need is a toolbox, a whole set of coping skills, because life keeps throwing you all kinds of different stresses, and can we teach people how to cope in various ways? So news on the first one. I'll be honest with you about it, but we're working hard at it. Really good news on mindfulness and what it does, and really great news on the bottom one. The third one is where I'm going to tell you we can prevent depression. #1 mental health problem worldwide, depression. We can prevent it, and we can prevent it by helping people to cope with stress. So, apologies to students if you've heard all these things before. I only pay attention to 2 sources in the media. I watch TV, I watch ESPN. In my car, I listen to NPR. Only one thing has turned up in an ad on National Public Radio and ESPN, and it's a company called Lumosity. Has anybody heard of Lumosity? Yeah. So either you listen to that. Yeah, they're everywhere. So they're in the upper left. They are a commercial enterprise based on the hypothesis, not the fact, but the hypothesis, which is another word for guess, that Yeah, well, educated indeed, educated, no doubt, and we're using it in a study. We're using another program called Cogmed in another study. The hypothesis is, like any muscle, if I exercise your brain, can I improve it? Does practice help? So go back to Eric Kendall's slide, that brilliant Nobel Prize. He showed that if I build long-term memories, I do change your brain. I help you to build more synapses. How does that happen? It happens through experience. So if I get you to do things over and over again. So the evidence right now would suggest that if you practice things, it can change. Here's the deal, though. What you want is, and that's what I want for kids who have brain tumors and leukemia, et cetera, is that if you play these computer games, it'll improve overall cognitive functioning. Your intelligence will go up. The kids will recover on the things they need to do in school. That would be called a FAR transfer. You learn a skill that's on a computer game, and it generalizes. What we get is what's called near transfer. You get better at the things you do on the computer, but not a whole lot other than that. So that's where we are right now. We are on the list with Lumosity. We're a study. We're subsidized by them to test it, which is tricky because they are a commercial enterprise. Most of our work is supported by the National Institutes of Health, and we can stay pretty clean when we do it that way. Here we're with a money-making operation, and we work with Cogmed. The Cogmed program, there's an example up here with kids playing a robot that appears on the screen, and it produces games for them to play, moderately engaging, and if they practice 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, for 5 to 6 weeks, we can show changes, both in terms of their performance on some kinds of tasks, and also using imaging techniques, we've shown changes in brain function in the prefrontal region, the place where we want that to happen. However, at this point, it's very limited and very localized. We can't show generalization. So we're worried. We're doing this right now with children with brain tumors. They show a horrible decline. Children with brain tumors have a slide in their cognitive function that begins, for some, even before they go through surgery. It goes through their treatment. It continues after their treatment ends. In fact, we haven't found a single study that finds where it bottoms out. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So it's as if something got set in motion in these children through the tumor and the treatment that we can't recover. So our goal is to get in as early as we possibly can, deliver a program like this to see if we can level that curve off. Most optimistic, see if we can turn it in a positive direction. I would say at this point, I think we can for limited kinds of skills, but not in a general way. So if you're playing Lumosity, if you're using any of these products, they are beneficial and helpful, but they're narrow right now in their effects. Okay? So the deal there is, think back, I said that kids who have these illnesses, they go through treatments, they're doubly hit. These cognitive functions are impaired, but downstream, their ability to deal with stress, manage their emotions, all that's at stake. So the stakes are high. What we want to try to improve for these children is big. I think what we're going to say right now is this program and something else, likely working with parents to facilitate cognitive development in their children, is where we're going to go as the next step here. Okay. Strategy 2, teach one coping skill. That's the guy. He's an ESPN reporter. He's on 60 Minutes now. He's from the Vanderbilt family. Oh, crap, it'll come to me. See, it's this stress affecting my long-term memory. Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper did a report on mindfulness. And he did a report in which he interacted with that gentleman in the corner there, John Kabat-Zinn. So it doesn't look like a Zen master, but he is. So he's the guy in terms of mindfulness meditation in the U.S. He's the man on the topic. And Anderson met with him, and Kabat-Zinn convinced him to go through the program. If you go online, you can find Anderson Cooper's report that this was the biggest life-changing experience I've ever been through. It changed everything for learning how to be mindful. So, what the heck is mindfulness? Well, first of all, you can buy a lot of books. So, mindfulness for the beginners is up in the upper left. I recommend that. On another one of those Nantucket trips, God help me, I took them wherever you go, there you are. That time, it's not that they didn't want to sit next to me. They wanted to sit next to me and make fun of me. That's the dumbest title to a book they'd ever heard. Wherever you go, there you are. Well, really? Where else would you be? Well, it turns out, anywhere but there. So here's Dr. Kabat-Zinn. We can be in three places in our thoughts. We can be in the present, we can be in the past, or we can be in the future. I'm going to gamble and say we're 25 people. 20 of you are in the present right now. 40 of you are thinking about what's next, and 15 of you are thinking about what happened recently. Most of us spend our time in the past and in the future. We lament and feel bad about what's happened. We worry about what's going to happen next. We spend precious little time in the moment. And that's all mindfulness boils down to, is be in the moment and be present. Meditation is a great way to achieve it, but it's not be in the moment half an hour a day. It's be in the moment as much as you possibly can. Be present. So the phrases that he uses is literally, wherever you go, there you are. It is, pay attention to where you are. And wherever you are, be where you are. Don't be the next thing. Don't be dinner right now. Don't be how hot it's going to be tomorrow. Don't be, I'm going to have to get up at 5:30 in order to get a seat in the shade so I don't cry when my kid's going across the stage and it took 3 hours to get there. Don't be there. Be here. Even if you're here, you don't have to pay attention to me. Just be here and be present. Because that's what he says is the task is one of coming to our senses. Not really being sensitive, but paying attention to all of your senses in the present moment. And out with it over the years. I've worked at it, practice. I don't think I practice as vigorously as I should.
How do you cope with that or adapt with that when the present
So it's he started this work. He's at the University of Massachusetts Amherst Medical School and chronic pain. And he said, I need to help people with chronic pain in the moment, present, and receptive pain. Because what's the ultimate point? It's to fight it, it's to be at odds with it, as opposed to coming to terms with it and being at peace. I'll tell you in a minute how you make your children, whose parents are depressed, and the kind of stress it brings them. So we're in the middle of a clinical trial, testing a program. I watch it every session, see what the group leaders are doing. Last night, they were teaching us the skill. And we had a girl saying, I don't want to accept. And she's like, I don't want to accept when she's mad and angry and sad and all that. It's awful. And our state is, so as bad. Yeah, the message is here, being present rather than trying to escape it or fight against it. And that's, I go where you go. I go, I don't like it. Why do I want to accept it? Why do I want to be present with it? This philosophy says, if you do, you'll ruminate less about the past, you'll worry less about the future, mind will wander less. That's not the big thing. It's a component of effective treatment. It changes the immune function and changes response to threats to the immune system. Wounds heal faster, and we get over illnesses quicker. And remember, I said in the beginning, what stress does is makes it more likely that other things will be sick. And the reason it does is because it compromises your health. But I don't think it's the whole thing. It's like having one tool. There was a saying from a psychologist a long time ago, the only tool you have is a hammer. You will treat everything as if it's a nail. And that's a problem, because the stuff in life isn't just nails. Okay? I'm not going to go with that next nail. That isn't nails. There's other things that can happen. But that has you need other tools, including a screwdriver. So our approach is, I need to teach you more. The place we've tested that the most is in our program to help children whose parents suffer from depression. Best evidence we have is 16% of Americans will develop major depressive disorder in their lifetime. If you're a child of depressed parents over your lifetime, you're up to 4 times greater risk to have that happen. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 65% likelihood for it. And some people say, well, it's all genetic. It's not all genetic. Genes are involved, but they do not predict depression. They only link to depression in the presence of high levels of stress. So our take on this is, if you want to reduce that risk, we need to focus on stressors in the environment of children who live with a parent who's depressed and see if we can teach them how to cope. So the model of parents' depression leads to stress in the family. It also compromises parenting skills. Kids need to cope with it in order to reduce their risk of problems. So we have several places we can intervene. We can help parents parent better to reduce stress and strengthen the kids' defense. And here's the guideline for good health. This is where I would urge from Dr. Turns out, the Serenity Prayer is spot on. It's evidence-based. It's proven by scientific. accept the things, the things you can, and figure out the difference between the two. If there are things in your life you can change to make better, get after it. Don't accept it. Don't change it. There's good ways to do that. But if you can't change it, come to terms with it. Accept it. Think about it in a way that makes it less toxic for you. Okay? In order to do that, you're going to need those prefrontal regions that I was talking about earlier. You're going to need those. So our program helps these families. We do it in a randomized design. Half the families are assigned to a program to learn these skills, and we teach parenting skills to the parents. The other half receive information to educate them. In our first study, we followed them for 2 years. We just started our second study of this now. When we look, we teach the kids what is stress, how to recognize signs of stress, what you're looking for in your life. We teach them coping. And we have an acronym of ADAPT. Accept, distract by using good activities and pleasant thoughts, and then use positive ones. And we teach them those skills. The original program was 8 weeks long. The current version is 10 weeks. We meet with them in small groups, 4 to 5 families at a time. The quality time is when we have the kids by themselves and the parents by themselves. I watched the videos from these, and it is astonishing to hear a mom say, "Oh my God, my daughter is driving me crazy," and in the other room, the daughter saying, "Oh my God, my mother is driving me crazy." So that's what you would expect. We're helping the parent to parent better and the child to cope with that mom. I'll go into details and examples. We use every method conceivable. And in anything like this, where we change thoughts and behaviors and emotions, we meet with them and then they practice. They go home with extensive homework to learn and practice the skills. So here's the deal over the 2 years. In the control group, 26% of the kids in the control group within 2 years were home in ages 9 to 11, 9 to 15, and left ages 11 to 17. In that period of time, 26% of the kids have had an onset of major depression. 16% is the lifetime rate for people across their whole lifetime. A quarter of these kids had already had an episode, and they hadn't even hit the end of that one. So that tells us just how high risk it is. 13% of the kids are so cut it like that. We prevented the onset of depression by 50% in kids who don't. And we did it. There's statistics gunked in here. I'm not going to bore you with it at all. But we showed it actually was due to improving the coping skills in the kids and improving the parenting skills in the parents. Change, that's what
consider and adapt the cognitive side to yourself.
Yep.
What happens in a situation where the situation is so difficult, the stressor is so difficult, it's physically imposing? Does it not merely cause stress, but also causes difficulty in adaptation and coping?
Yes. Yep. So that's where we have to look at the magnitude of the stressor, the nature of the situation. Some of those things we can predict them in advance, and if we can, we help prepare people for what's coming next. When they come on and they're unpredictable and uncontrollable, then we have to help people to ride it out. So that was that question about what if I'm being taught to accept things that I find completely unacceptable. And we have a girl telling us that right now, point blank. What's happening to me is unacceptable. I can't say to myself, it just is the way it is. Wherever you go, there you are. This is it. And she was just kind of yelling at the group leader about this is just nonsense. And our job is to say, well, here's your choice. If you continue to say to yourself, this is unacceptable, this is horrible, I hate this, that's not going to work out for you. What are you going to be left? You're going to be angry, you're going to be sad, you're going to be frustrated. All things considered, how about you hang on to the side of the boat and ride along in the current and let's see where this takes us. I'm going to help people to say sometimes, as bad as it gets, the best you can do is to kind of ride the waves. So it's a tough method. In addition, what we found is that the findings weren't equal. So we went back and asked, what if the parent, when the kids were in the program, was right smack in an episode of depression? Depression comes and goes. We go into an episode, we come out, it recurs, it's awful in that way. Even people who are successfully treated are still at risk for it to come back. If the parent was not in an episode, we had a better effect. 11% of those kids did not develop depression, and 27% in the control. But if the parent was in an episode, 20% of the kids in the program ended up going into depression at some point in the next 2 years. So we best help the kiddos whose parents weren't currently depressed at the time we were trying to help them and help their parents. 9 to 15. So they come in at that age and then we follow them at this point. 2 years. So they've now become 11 to 17. That's the window where we're looking for. So,
Big on thinking about the future in an anxious way, but what about when you know the future is going to be better?
Good.
You're running a race, and the race
Good.
is really hard. After you get that gold medal, 20 years from now,
Perfect.
good job, it's going well,
But the end point.
that's that.
It is, because that would fit in what we call the big one. To me, the best one isn't, you can tell what. It's not acceptance, and not, I just can't do it. It's cognitive reappraisal. Can I find meaning in something that's difficult? Can I see the glasses half full rather than half empty, or even a quarter full rather than 3/4 empty? So that's the biggest skill we teach these kids. What's interesting in terms of cognitive stuff is that's the most complicated one, and that's the one that depends most on the development of these good executive basic cognitive skills. What I'm worried about kids who've taken a hit there, I didn't mention it, but depression erodes executive function. So if you become depressed, your ability to do those things. So reappraisal is huge. I just had it up there, and we call it positive thinking for the kids because we didn't think 9 to 15-year-olds were going to be buying a cognitive reappraisal as something we wanted to talk to them about. But think about it in a different way so that it's less bad. And that's a terrific skill. And people who are struggling with depression, that's one of the first things to know. The world is dark. The future is pessimistic. It's hopeless. Nothing's going to get better. In fact, we have a parent of that girl who says, I don't want to accept this. She's in the other room saying, there's nothing I can do to make this better. I feel like my daughter's a monster, and I don't know how to help her. And everything we're offering right now, early in the program, it's just like water bouncing off of the roof of your car. It just isn't taken. Well, that's where I was mentioning if one is an advocate of acceptance and mindfulness, that's where Dr. Kevin Zinn started his work with chronic pain to say one way to help cope with chronic pain is to come to terms with it, to accept it, and that's how to reject it. And so that model that gets there. Okay? So where we are now in the second go-round of this is we beat this up. I was thrilled to know we could cut rates of depression in half. But having 13% of these kids develop depression before age of 17 is unacceptable. We cannot tolerate that. So we're back again with another 5 to 6 year study. We beefed it up to see if we can improve our ability to help the kids and prevent recurrences in the parents. Because in our program, 50% of the parents had their depression come back, and we think that's why we didn't have as good a treatment as we could. So, to recap, exposure to stress, and particularly chronic stress, is not good for you. And you learned today, one of the main ways it's not good for you is it has direct effects on your brain. Long ago, there was a commercial. This is your brain, and then this is your brain on drugs, and there's a frying pan, and the other. All right, this is your brain on stress. Not good. Okay, so that's going on. Resilience, when you build those executive functions, you need, I think, a wide array of coping skills, and we can do it by teaching people these skills. So I was in Vermont. I worked with a surgeon. He was also a teacher. And he said to me, David Cook said, every day I get up, and when my feet touch the floor, I say to myself, today's the day I'm going to cure cancer. And every day you go home and say, it didn't happen today. And the next day you get up and say, today's the day I'm going to do it. Students, what I wish for you is you pick something where every day you get up and you say to yourself, I'm going to do something. Find something you love to do and want to pay off to be big. So this is a quote. I don't think my students pay a little bit of attention to it, but I'm totally behind my desk. What are you going to do if you want and only? You're on the precipice of that life. I feel incredibly lucky that what I do, I love it. I love the people that I do it with. I don't think we've done anything yet. I don't think we've changed people's lives yet, but I get up every day, and I love to go to work because I'm challenged. I get smarter in the days I work hard, and I think there's a shot that we might get things different. So, gang, don't shortchange